Hello YouTube, I call myself Zondagskind and I like to play Civilization 6. And when I do, it's really nice to spawn next to a natural wonder. But just like the wonders you build, the wonders that the map spawns aren't all created equal. So let's try and put them into a tier list. But first, if you like this video, then please leave a like and do consider subscribing, it helps the channel grow. I'm making this tier list to celebrate getting to 300 subscribers, and at 500 subscribers I'll make another tier list. Will it be about city-states? Will it be about pantheons? Will it be about soundtracks? Let me know down in the comments what you would like the next tier list to be, and I will consider it. So let's get into this one now. Making a tier list for natural wonders is a bit harder than for built wonders because you don't put in an effort. Spawning next to an F tier natural wonder is still a lot better than building an F tier wonder, usually speaking. So I made 8 categories to even start to compare them to one another, and just because I think it helps to talk about the natural wonders, I'll share them with you. So generally speaking, from worst to best, the 8 categories are: wonders associated with the desert, wonders which appear as a lake, wonders which act as a volcano, wonders with special miscellaneous effects, wonders with the yields on their own tiles, wonders of one tile that give yields to adjacent tiles, wonders associated with the ocean, and wonders which spread yields across multiple adjacent tiles. And I'll talk a bit about why those are good or bad in those specific categories. So let's start with the first one, the desert category. As a category, the desert natural wonders are pretty weak because they are surrounded by bad tiles, and frankly, the yields on these wonders aren't that great that you can just put a city next to them and feel good about them. You kind of have to build Petra next to them, which first of all means that you only have use for one desert natural wonder in your game, so spawning next to 2 is tricky, and it basically means you have to put in work yourself to even unlock any potential. And since you don't want to have 6 cities in the desert unless you're a specific desert civ, it also means that you're not going to have 4 holy sites next to a 4-tile desert wonder. So as a category, definitely the weakest ones. But what of the individual wonders? Delicate Arch gives 2 faith and 1 gold to adjacent tiles. I quite like this wonder as a desert wonder, but yeah, you have to build Petra next to it, otherwise the yields don't really give you much. Maybe you get it on a grassland hill because Delicate Arch spawns at the edge of the desert, but that would mean you are quite lucky indeed. The Eye of the Sahara, in my opinion, is the weakest natural wonder of them all. 2 production and 1 science on its own tiles is a pretty abysmal yield, and if you don't build Petra next to it, it is a useless tile to work. Then it gives additional production and science when the game reaches the atomic era, but that is so far into the game that it's hardly even worth mentioning. This is probably the worst natural wonder to have, and you would literally rather have any other natural wonder next to you. Such as perhaps Sahara el Beyda, 1 science, 1 culture and 4 gold onto its 4 tiles. Of the 4 desert wonders, this definitely makes for the most spectacular Petra yield, and for sure if you do get it, it's pretty nice, but it's again no food and no production onto a desert wonder, which is usually surrounded by other no food, no production tiles. So in terms of actually getting a useful city from the get-go, this is pretty bad, and this is still an E tier, although it's probably a little bit higher than Delicate Arch. And finally, Uluru gets a D tier. It's the best of the desert wonders in my opinion because it gives 2 culture and 2 faith to adjacent tiles, and it gives 4 appeal to adjacent tiles rather than +2, which means you have better possible national parks, and it's just straight up a better yield than Delicate Arch. So that's why it just skips into D tier for me, but yeah, it is still the best only of the worst category. So let's put those wonders into the tier list, and it looks like this. Let's go on to the next category, the lake natural wonders. The lake category, in my opinion, is the second worst because they are all pretty small, 1 or 2 tiles. The yields on them aren't good enough to work, at least with the first citizens of a new town. And then the biggest bonus should be that they give fresh water, and they don't even all do that. Because of that, the ratings do go very far apart, so let's look at the specific wonders. Crater Lake gets an E tier. It gives 1 science and 5 faith onto its own tile, and it gives you fresh water. I actually have a soft spot for Crater Lake ever since I did one Korea game where I spawned right on top of it and I could get any pantheon I wanted by working it as the first tile. But I have to acknowledge that that is a pretty niche situation. I'm not excited when I see this anywhere beyond 4 tiles out of my capital. Maybe I overcorrected a little and maybe this is a low D tier, but it's a pretty weak natural wonder all in all. At least it's better than the F tier Dead Sea, which gives 2 faith and 2 culture onto its own 2 tiles and lets units healing on adjacent tiles heal completely. I haven't been able to use that last thing to my advantage yet, and I think it's a pretty niche ability. Also, it does not provide fresh water, which basically defeats the purpose of being a lake natural wonder. You can put seaside resorts next to it because it acts as coast, but that is only useful to one type of game, whereas getting fresh water would have been useful in any other game, so F tier. The Fountain of Youth is easily my favorite lake wonder. 4 science and 4 faith is a pretty good yield. If you spawn on top of it, you can get that instant pantheon like I described with Crater Lake. And just in any case, 8 yields are good enough that I would definitely work this with, let's say, my 4th citizen in a town. Then, land units that enter the Fountain of Youth receive the ability Water of Life, giving them plus 10 healing in any territory. I had a game where I spawned, I think, 8 tiles from Fountain of Youth as Scythia, and it was an amazing game, and I can recommend it. It's good even if you're not going to war actively. It's still good on the defense. It's good to have your scouts go by that so they are more resilient in scouting. This is just a really good natural wonder. And Ik-Kil is also pretty good C tier, plus 50% production when producing wonders and districts in the adjacent tiles. So, the amount of production you could get if you happen to litter Ik-Kil with wonders is pretty insane. And I've heard that it's really good if you happen to be next to it for a 1 city challenge. The only reason I'm not putting it in B tier is that it means that you have to put in work to get a bonus from Ik-Kil, rather than getting some kind of bonus passively, which is what I value for natural wonders. And the Lake Retba joins the Dead Sea in F tier for most of the same reasons. The yields aren't good enough. 1 production, 2 gold and 2 culture isn't a tile I'd want to be working without getting a preserve next to it, and it also doesn't give fresh water. I'd argue that the yields are a little better than Dead Sea, but then Dead Sea has this niche healing ability, so they're pretty equal to one another. And so we slot in the Lake Wonders. It's basically a lake desert sandwich, and we go on with the Volcano category. The Volcano natural wonders are a double-edged sword. On one hand, the yields next to them are usually pretty good, especially as they scale thanks to eruptions. On the other hand, those eruptions could lose you population or force you to repair buildings or improvements. So, having a volcano in your 2nd, 3rd or 4th city is usually pretty nice, but spawning right next to them is sometimes actually detrimental to your game. They could literally lose you the game, which is not great. Eyjafjallajökull, aka the Icelandic volcano, gives 1 culture and 2 food to adjacent tiles, grants medium yields upon eruption, and is most likely to damage buildings and districts. The yields are amazing, and I've had a game where I've been able to settle a snow city thanks to it as Sweden and get open air museums, which was great, but I've just had too many occasions of launching the Earth satellite and finding out Eyjafjallajökull was hiding somewhere in the snow where I would never think to settle in the first place. This is a D tier for me. Mount Kilimanjaro gives 2 food to adjacent tiles and low yields upon eruption. So that all sounds worse than the Icelandic volcano, but Kilimanjaro doesn't spawn in the tundra or snow, at least I don't find it to. So you actually get a lot more use of the tiles that it gives those yields to. For that reason, I give it a B tier. I find it really nice to be next to Kilimanjaro. I find it doesn't erupt too often, which means I don't get a lot of damage and I can just use the food from Kilimanjaro to grow my empire. Mount Vesuvius is basically the epitome of the double-edged sword quality I was talking about earlier. The yields get pretty spectacular next to Vesuvius, especially when the eruptions go off, and it gives culture to the tiles it erupts on, but it really hurts when you're just about to hit 10 population, get your 4th district going, and then Vesuvius decides to put you back down to 5 population just because. So it can be pretty spectacular, but you definitely don't want to have your capital next to Vesuvius, and for that reason, on balance, I'm giving it a D tier. So we slot in those 3 wonders and we move on to what I have dubbed the Trickster category. These are wonders whose main claim to fame is that they give some other kind of effect, like adjacency or great people points. And because of that, it's hard to say something about the quality of the category. And by the way, yes, you could exchange a lot of these wonders for wonders in other categories, but let's just get into them. First off, the Giant's Causeway gives 1 culture to adjacent tiles and grants the ability Spear Fin to units when they move adjacent to the wonder for the first time, and that gives them 5 combat strength permanently. This gets a B tier for me, even though I'm kind of factoring in the combat strength potential, which I haven't found to be useful yet, but I think potentially it is pretty strong, and the culture yield is pretty good, of course, so maybe it's actually a high C tier, but I've put it in B tier for now. The naval counterpart Lysefjord gets an E tier. I find too often that Lysefjord is in a part of the sea where I can't get with my boats, or it's too far away, it's across an ocean already, and the free promotion just doesn't do enough for me. So basically all I care about is the 1 production to adjacent tiles, which is nice if you spawn right next to Lysefjord, but it's definitely a pretty weak wonder all in all. Pamukkale gives 1 amenity and an extra one if it's next to an entertainment complex, and gives a major adjacency bonus to theatre squares, campuses and commercial hub districts. Also, it gives a standard adjacency bonus to the holy site districts, and this is on top of the major adjacency you would normally get, so you can get 2 + 6 holy sites next to Pamukkale. For that reason, I'm always very excited to see it. But it is in C tier. It's not higher because, again, it's a wonder that you have to put effort into. By comparison, Zhangye Danxia is the ultimate lazy natural wonder. Just have 1 of its tiles in your empire and you get 2 great general and 2 great merchant points. Which is fine. It kind of falls off in games where you don't care about great generals. And certainly just 2 great people points isn't the best yield ever, but since you have to do literally nothing for it, it is really nice to spawn next to it, so it's a D tier for me. So 4 wonders, 4 different tiers, and we move on with the category of the terrain natural wonders. These natural wonders have in common that they have yields on their own tiles. They're usually a bit larger, 3 or 4 tiles. Because of that, you can get multiple holy sites next to them. And when preserves were introduced, these definitely were helped a lot because the yields used to be not good enough to work, and with preserves you can just make them good enough to work. That does of course require a little effort, but in general the terrain natural wonders did get a lot stronger when preserves were introduced into the game. The one least in need of that buff was probably the Chocolate Hills, because 1 food, 2 production and 1 science was always a decent tile to work. And boy can you with Chocolate Hills, because it has 4 tiles. Now that means that you can put preserves next to them, which means that the tiles will be more workable even as your other tiles scale up. Also with 4 tiles it fits really nicely into national parks. So Chocolate Hills definitely closer to A tier than it is to C tier. It's at the top, I would say, of B tier. Down in D tier we find the Cliffs of Dover. 3 gold, 3 culture and 2 food of course is a better yield, and 4 appeal instead of 2 is nice, but because Cliffs of Dover have 2 tiles and they're always on the coast, that means there's only 1 spot for either a +4 holy site or a really nice preserve, and you have to pick either one of those or put it into a national park. You can't do both. So it's still a nice wonder to have. The yields aren't trash anymore, but it's D tier for me. The same goes for Gobustan, 3 tiles which give 3 culture and 1 production. The lack of food and scarce production means that I don't want to work on these tiles with an early citizen, and I kind of need preserves, I feel, to make this wonder shine. Back in B tier we have Pantanal. This gives 2 food and 2 culture on its tiles, and I really like that at least the citizens working these tiles can sustain themselves and not starve to death. And also, very importantly, these are 4 tiles, which just gives you more opportunities for very good holy sites and good preserves. So for that reason I think it's significantly better than, for example, Gobustan, I would say that this one is closer to C tier than A tier. This is the bottom of B tier, whereas Chocolate Hills is the top of B tier, but it's still a pretty good wonder all in all. And Ubsunur Hollow is in C tier. It gives 2 faith, 1 food, and 1 production on its own tiles, which is 4 tiles again, which I do value. But Ubsunur Hollow does tend to spawn in the tundra, where you would also already need more food, and then Ubsunur Hollow itself also only gives 1 food, so that is a little tricky, but still 4 tile natural wonder for me is C tier. And so we fill them in, the D tier is now filled up, and we move on with the minor yield category. These are natural wonders which have 1 tile and give yields onto adjacent tiles. Then you can improve those tiles, of course, with mines, plantations, whatever. And the reason I value that quite a lot is that, for example, the terrain type kind of ties you to holy sites and or preserves, whereas these are more flexible and they are more valuable, in my opinion, for example, science and diplomacy games in general. Specifically, Mato Tipila I think is pretty strong with 1 faith and 1 production to adjacent tiles. Honestly, if I had to pick 2 yields to give onto adjacent tiles from a wonder, it's probably faith and production. They are really good. It's been more than once that I've been able to build a religion game just off of Mato, and in other games just have 2 really good cities next to it. So this might be recency bias because I've recently had good games with Mato, but I think this is deserving of the first A tier in this list. In B tier, we find Matterhorn. It gives 1 culture onto adjacent tiles, and land units are given a bonus where they have better movement and 3 combat strength on hills. It makes it one of the few wonders that is even useful when you don't get to settle it, because when you have a scout and it goes adjacent to it, it just basically gets the Alpine promotion, which is pretty nice. I'd say the yield is a little worse than Mato Tipila, and that's why it's in B tier, but still one that I am pretty excited about wherever I find it. I'm slightly less excited about Tsingy, but it's still C tier, so it gives 1 culture and 1 science. So how is it worse than Matterhorn? Well, first off, I found that Tsingy has the tendency to spawn in the tundra. It does also spawn in grasslands, but it kind of tends to go in tundra. And also, of course, you don't have the Alpine promotion, so you just don't have any use for Tsingy outside your borders. So that's why I arrive at C tier. So 1, 2, 3, ABC, fill them in, and we go on with the next category, which is the ocean category. It's all natural wonders that have to do with coast or the ocean, and these ones are usually pretty outstanding. They usually improve tiles which would otherwise be pretty dead, and in general, yields in the ocean can get pretty bonkers thanks to, for example, Mausoleum and Halicarnassus. And for some of these wonders, you can also even use a preserve next to them, and it basically functions just like a land tile. So it can get pretty nutty with these wonders, especially if you can finagle the yields to get even higher, and just in general, they're pretty good even without any finagling. Starting with the Bermuda Triangle, it gives 5 signs to adjacent tiles, which in the triangle shape it has means there are 3 10 signs tiles, but sadly you usually can't work those. Also, naval units entering it gain an extra movement permanently and are teleported to a pre-selected tile somewhere else on the map, and it's kind of a crapshoot whether that is good or bad. If you were to spawn next to Bermuda Triangle and you could work the tiles, it would be absolutely bonkers and you've basically auto-won the game, but that is a 1 in a million shot. More often than not, you will never be able to work these tiles. So it's hard to even rank it, and I think I'm just going with C tier on this. The Galápagos Islands, on the other hand, despite only giving 2 signs to adjacent tiles, go into A tier. And it's just because it's more common to find these tiles in workable locations because they are coast tiles, not ocean tiles. It's just pretty glorious to get 2 signs on your fishing boats. Sometimes the location is awkward, it's awkwardly rotated, or the tiles are ocean tiles, but usually I find that the Galápagos tiles at least are partially workable. So it's a low A tier I think, but A tier nonetheless. Our first S tier wonder is the Great Barrier Reef. It gives 3 food and 2 science onto its own 2 tiles, and it gives a major adjacency bonus to campus districts, which just makes you a lot more flexible. You don't just have an opportunity for a good holy site, but also for a very, very good campus. And when you build a harbor in this city, which you usually will, you'll be able to improve the tiles of Great Barrier Reef with the lighthouse, the shipyard, and the seaport, as well as maybe Mausoleum of Halicarnassus, as well as maybe the Susan bonus of Auckland. It can get pretty amazing, and the fact that you can build a holy site and or a campus next to it is just very, very good. Also very good is Ha Long Bay with 3 food, 1 production and 1 culture on its own 2 tiles. I consider the 15 combat strength when defending as a merely thematic bonus. I actually like the yield, the 1 production and 1 culture, better than the 2 science from Great Barrier Reef. And the only reason that Ha Long Bay sits in a well-deserved A tier and Great Barrier in S is that the Great Barrier Reef gives adjacency to campuses. Whereas Ha Long Bay is a fine place to put a holy site next to, or a preserve, but it doesn't give that extra flexibility. Still, probably one of my personal favorites and a very well-deserved A tier for it. And it's a similar story for Piopiotahi with 1 gold and 1 culture to adjacent tiles. Here, size matters. Piopiotahi is 3 tiles large, and because of the triangle shape, it gives a lot of yields onto a lot of adjacent tiles, which are just really nice. The harbor cities usually don't struggle for gold anyway, and Piopiotahi makes it really nice to work those tiles. In fact, it's kind of the first wonder where you run into the problem of you want to get a holy site, but you don't want to crush these great yields. And that is actually going to be a bit of a running theme for the last, and in my opinion, best category of natural wonders. Those that are multiple tiles large and give yields to adjacent tiles, the major yield natural wonders. What all these wonders have in common is that they give yields onto multiple tiles, and because the tiles that are adjacent overlap, you get very high yields on some of them. Because they are larger, they are easier to fit into national parks, and they're easier to find also. And they're just the best ones, usually speaking. They're pretty spectacular, but let's look at the specific ones to say which ones are the very best. It's certainly not Mount Everest, it's in C tier, because compared to the other ones in this category, 1 faith to adjacent tiles is a relatively lackluster yield. Also, you won't care about the permanent bonus movement to religious units in 95% of your games, and in the other 5% Mount Everest won't be in the right spot. Then it's found in mountain ranges, which means that often at least a couple of the tiles you could potentially work are actually blocked by mountains. And because of that, it kind of falls into C tier. It's still a nice wonder to find, and faith is at least a good yield to have from a natural wonder, but it's just not the amazing juggernaut that we will see now. It's Mount Roraima, a very exciting wonder. It gives 1 faith and 1 science to adjacent tiles. It's 4 tiles big, and because of its funky shape, it actually gives it onto more tiles than it could if it were diamond shaped. And there's this 1 little corner where you have 3 faith and 3 science, and that single tile to me is the best tile any map can have, unless it's like a mountain or something, which I've also seen, and I've cried about it internally. Spawning next to Mount Roraima, for me, is the most exciting thing. This is my personal favorite bar none, even though I think objectively it's the number 2 natural wonder. But it's very big, it gives a bunch of yields, which are very good faith and science. Because of its funky shape, weirdly, I feel it fits better in national parks, even though that shouldn't make sense. And yeah, what else is there to say? This is just an amazing natural wonder. But then immediately I have to acknowledge that Païtiti is probably just better. Gives 2 culture and 3 gold to adjacent tiles, and cities that own tiles of Païtiti gain a gold bonus on trade routes, which I feel like is a bonus that is often overlooked. So there are 3 tiles next to Païtiti with 4 culture and 6 gold, which are just absolutely glorious. And if you spawn close to Païtiti, definitely you want to beeline settling it, because it's just great, especially with the trading bonus. This is probably the best natural wonder in the game, which pains me to say just coming after Mount Roraima, but I think it's the truth. And then Torres del Paine just didn't make it into S tier. It's A tier for me. It doubles the base terrain yields of all adjacent tiles. It doesn't count the features like forest or marsh. Yes, I have seen the Potato McWissy playlist where he played as China and spawned right on top of Torres del Paine, and it was absolutely glorious. And in fact, I will say that a Torres del Paine which is just surrounded by grassland or plains hills is probably a better natural wonder than a Mount Roraima or a Païtiti. But you are a little more dependent, I feel, than with those wonders on the actual tiles it's next to, because it doubles the base terrain yield of that tile. So if it doubles the yield of a lake tile, it's not that exciting. If it doubles the yield of a tundra tile, that's fine, but also not very exciting. So you're a little more dependent on the actual tiles it's modifying, and for that it's still an amazing natural wonder, and in some circumstances the best in the game. But I think to give it a rating, I'm going to go with A tier on this. And the same goes for Yosemite. 1 gold, 1 food, 1 science to adjacent tiles is really good, and the only thing keeping it out of S tier is just that it's only 2 tiles. And with that, we conclude my natural wonder tier list. So, I hope you liked that. If you did, then do please leave a like. Let me know down in the comments what wonder you thought should have been way higher or way lower, and what you want to see a tier list made of. In any case, you can subscribe and ding the bell, and you will be notified when I upload anything on here. You can watch me live on twitch.tv/Zondagskind, and I will see you in the next one. Bye bye!